The opposition has decried the proposed changes, describing them as a hit on retirement savings and a broken promise. The Shadow Assistant Treasurer Melissa Cormann spoke to me from Perth about the government's plans. Melissa Cormann, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
The government's announced a number of changes. I wouldn't mind going through some of them individually to get the coalition's take on them. One of the centrepieces is putting a 15% tax on super income as it is over $100,000. That's in the drawdown phase, not as it's being accumulated. Is that an initiative the government can see merit in putting in a tax when income is that great from superannuation savings?
Well, what we'll say here is that it's a complete breach of faith with the Australian people. Only a few weeks ago, the Prime Minister made an emphatic promise that the government would not be taxing the super payments for the over 60s, and effectively that announcement today is a tax on super payments for the over 60s through the back door. So it's yet another broken promise from a Prime Minister who has, of course, a very bad track record when it comes to keeping her promises.
Well, what it is the government going ahead with tax reforms that it's been looking at ever since the tax forum last year. So it's not entirely unexpected that the government is making changes in this area, and in fact they're less than what many in the sector had feared.
Well, we know that the government, over the last couple of months, in fact over the past year, has been looking at a whole series of nasty tax increases targeting people doing the right thing by saving to achieve a self-funded retirement. And yes, the industry would be somewhat relieved today that the government has been shamed into backing down from some of the worst things that they've been looking at for now. But let's be very clear about this. This is a tactical retreat from a government that has been under increasing pressure, including from its own members in caucus, over the bungling and outrageous class war attack on people saving for their retirement.
Do you agree that there's any need to end open-ended concessions like the fact that there is currently no taxation at any point when it comes to income being drawn from superannuation savings? Is it just a matter of you would be willing to have it at a different point to cut in, or do you not think there's any need to tighten concessions when it comes to tax on superannuation at all?
Well, we do not support increasing taxes on superannuation. We've already said that in government we will not make any negative, unexpected changes to superannuation.
But is that sustainable in the long term to rule out any changes?
Well, what is not sustainable is the constant chopping and changing of the current government, the constant increases in taxes on superannuation, which of course put pressure on the age pension ultimately. I mean, what is in the national interest is for us to encourage as many Australians as possible to work hard, to save, so they can look after their own needs in retirement, so they don't have to be a burden on the public purse, so they don't have to rely on the age pension.
What about this proposal from Bill Shorten that there be a council of superannuation guardians? He's saying that would take some of the political heat out of it, that you could have an independent group assess policy proposals put forward for the industry. It would report to Parliament, not to govern, and that would avoid the sort of political game playing that you're suggesting the government undertake. So would you support that proposal?
Well, I mean, what Bill Shorten is proposing there is some more bureaucracy to keep a bad government in check. I mean, if we had a good government, we wouldn't need yet more bureaucracy to stop a bad government from, doing all of the bad things that Labor has been looking at in the last few months. We remain unconvinced that there is a case to spend yet more money on yet more red tape, on yet more bureaucracy, when all we need is a firm bipartisan commitment that there will be no more detrimental, unexpected changes to superannuation moving forward, at least for the next term of Parliament.
Well, Wayne Swan has said he's not looking at making any more changes now he's made these announcements that he has today. Industry seems satisfied, at least, that this is not radical changes that they couldn't live with. So what's the big concern from this point forward? Are you over-egging it here?
No, I'm not over-egging it. I mean, if you look at what Wayne Swan said in the lead-up to the 2007 election, he said that Labor in government would not make any changes to superannuation then either. And over the last 5 years, we've had more than $8 billion in increased taxes targeting superannuation. We had the massive reductions in concessional contribution caps. We had the massive cuts in government super co-contributions for lower income earners. The government, Wayne Swan, has reduced the co-contribution for low-income earners from $1,500 under the coalition to $500 now. That is a cut of more than $3.3 billion over the last 4 budgets. So when Wayne Swan says today there will be no more tax increases on super in the government that I'm the treasurer of, well, that is as believable as Julia Gillard saying there will be no more, there will be no carbon tax under a government I lead.
Well, you've said you don't want any more changes over the next term of Parliament, but if a coalition government were to get into power, you would be removing the increase in the super contribution, co-contribution from 9% to 12%. So that's a pretty radical change a coalition government would be bringing in, would it not?
Well, we've said we wouldn't make any negative, unexpected changes. The change that you mentioned is an unfunded promise that Labor has attached to the mining tax, which hasn't raised any meaningful revenue. So we've been on the record for a very long time that we will not be keeping any of the unfunded promises that Labor has attached to the mining tax, with the single exception of the increase in compulsory super from 9 to 12%. And whatever Labor says now, if Labor was re-elected at the next election, they would have to scrap that particular promise too, because they can't afford it, because the mining tax that Wayne Swan has put together is a complete mess. It is a complete fiasco, and it has come in more than 90% below its revenue target. But
you've been more than happy with the revenue raised by the Petroleum Resources Rent Tax. Is it right that the coalition is going to increase the expanded remit of the PRRT that now includes onshore oil and gas fields too?
Well, that is actually not right, because if you look at the budget and if you look at the evidence from Treasury, the government's onshore expansion of the PRRT does not have any revenue attached to it whatsoever. The government is not expecting any revenue, $0 from the onshore expansion of the PRRT, at least over the current forward estimates. That is not even an actual outcome. That is in terms of their revenue projections. Now, what we've said is we'll scrap the mining tax, that is the minerals resource rent tax. In the past, I've chaired a committee which recommended that we should scrap the onshore expansion of the PRRT as well. However, since then, the APIA, the peak body for the oil and gas sector, has come to us and said that they're happy with the PRRT, and I'm not surprised, given that it's not going to raise any revenue whatsoever. So on that basis, given it's a tax that has been in place for a long time, offshore, and given that the industry is totally relaxed about it, then we'll say, well, that's fine. We'll scrap the mining tax, no ifs, no buts. But the PRRT, of course, has been in place for a long time.
But your resources spokesman, Ian Macfarlane, has said this morning that the coalition hasn't decided on this issue and that it can't decide until it's in government and has more information. So what you're saying directly contradicts your resources spokesman.
On which issue?
On whether or not to keep the expansion of the PRRT to onshore resources, onto onshore fields.
Well, I mean, the position of the coalition is as I've just put it to you.
So has he got it wrong?
Well, I mean, I'm not aware of the interview that you're quoting. I haven't seen the transcript of what you're talking about, so I can't really comment on something that I haven't heard him say and that I haven't seen written in the transcript. All I can say to you is that we will be scrapping the mining tax. We've been on the record for that for a very long time. The onshore expansion of the petroleum resource rent tax is not expected to raise any revenue, even by the government. What obviously has been reported today is Joe Hockey confirming that we do not intend to scrap the onshore expansion of the PRRT, given that has been in place for a very long time.
So do you need to make that clear?
The PRRT overall.
Yeah, do you need to make that clearer to your shadow cabinet, perhaps?
Well, I mean, that is not a matter for me. As I say, I mean, you're now really asking me to comment on something that I just haven't seen.
All right, no worries. Matthias Cormann, thanks very much for joining us.
Good to be here.